Blimey, this is proper.
Yeah, it's not just Weetabix, it's with crack cocaine on top, isn't it? By Sunak standards, anyway.
I'm not sure that Liz Truss is necessarily going to survive till the end of question 6 at this rate, if he keeps on cracking it up.
The Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Can I too welcome the postmasters in the gallery in their quest for justice? And Mr. Speaker, this week we marked 35 years since the disaster at Hillsborough, and the enduring courage and determination of the families must be marked by the passing of a Hillsborough law. Mr. Speaker, we also lost Lord Richard Rosser, a lifelong member of the Labour Party. He will be greatly missed, and our thoughts are with his wife Sheena, his family and friends. Mr. Speaker, I'm privileged to be the proud owner of a copy of the former Prime Minister's new book. It's a rare, unsigned copy.
Oh, dear.
It's the only unsigned copy. It's quite the read. She claims the Tory party's disastrous kamikaze budget that triggered chaos for millions was, her words, the happiest moment of her premiership. Has the Prime Minister met anyone with a mortgage who agrees?
Obviously talking about Liz Truss's
Mr. Speaker, all I'd say is he ought to spend a bit less time reading that book and a bit more time reading the Deputy Leader's tax advice.
Wow.
Well, that answers that one then.
Slam dunk. That's more like it.
Yes, I mean, and that's punchy, and also gets to the heart of this issue, which is, in terms of the politics of it, it's partly about what Angela Rayner did or didn't do, and whether she misled various tax or electoral authorities. There's this whole question about the legal advice and the fact that Starmer purports to back Rayner, but apparently hasn't read it.
Yeah.
Which he seems to be not doing precisely because he doesn't want to know what's in it, because that may or may not support what she's claimed about it.
And for a man who has put quite a lot of store by the fact he's a lawyer, former director of public prosecutions, he's prosecuted more people than you've had hot dinners and so on.
That's not actually true.
Perhaps not you, but other people have had hot dinners. But to then say, well, legal advice has nothing to do with me, my team have looked at it, does seem a little bit odd. An interesting, I mean, of all the things to pick out of the book, what's quite smart about that question from Keir Starmer is it zeroes in on the message they want to land. The kamikaze budget, we've not had that for a long time, but it's the mini budget led to the mortgage increases, Labour says, and so she literally describes in the book on her way to a visit after the mini budget, describing it as the happiest time of her life.
Yeah, she hadn't realised sort of how badly it had gone wrong at that point.
No,
we should say, but
I'm not sure she still does.
I read it cover to cover last night, actually.
Yeah.
I found it more sort of entertaining and interesting than Patrick did in his review on the Times website now. And she makes a lot of good points, but she doesn't make many good points about herself. There's not a lot of self-reflection there.
In the piece that I wrote, it was zero self-reflection. Essentially.
I think that's fair. And it's. Yeah, there's plenty there to latch onto. She's right that Prime Ministers have no support and ought to have medical backup and someone to do their hair without having to call somebody in. All of that's fair enough. She even makes she raises interesting questions about all these public institutions like the OBR and the Bank of England and how accountable they are and all the rest of it. But she then dismisses it all as lefty wokeism, and there's not really a lot of sort of... having identified the problem and drawn it to people's attention, she's not really offering vast numbers of solutions, and there are some, hilarious bits in it.
Actually, if it mounted, we don't need to get too bogged down in it again, but if she mounted a big argument about how we need a more politicised political system,
well,
more support.
It's about Parliament. Is
Yeah.
Parliament supreme or isn't it?
Yeah.
And with the Supreme Court and lots of these quangos and other public bodies, which are seen as sort of unimpeachable, her view is that they have an opinion and it's contrary to her own. And, there's quite a decent amount of evidence for that. But how you what is the alternative to the OBR? We had the OBR because in the past, the Treasury used just make up its own estimates and it was completely nonsensical.
Make up her own numbers. But anyway, let's not get bogged down in Liz Truss again, because I suspect... that Keir Starmer will. Let's go back to the House of Commons PMQs Unpacked. Question 2 from Keir Starmer. People very excited about Rishi Sunak's comeback there, about we spend less time reading Liz Truss's book and more time reading Angela Rayner's legal advice. Lindsay Hoyle's on his feet.
And he probably had a flowchart which said, if he goes for Truss, I go for Rayner.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, we've got a billionaire Prime Minister and a billionaire Prime Minister, both of whose families have used schemes to avoid millions of pounds of tax, smearing a working-class woman. And the Prime Minister,
Angela Rayner joining in the heckling there,
has a long list of people to blame for the economic misery. They don't want to hear it. They made her Prime Minister, and millions of people are paying the price.
I mean,
She's
strictly
got
speaking,
a
lots of
long
them didn't
list
want
of people to blame. She blames the Governor of the Bank of England, the Treasury, the Office for Budget Responsibility. The American President is blamed at one point. We even learned that the poor old lettuce was part of the deep state. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that it's actually much simpler than that? It was the Tories' unfunded tax cuts, tens of billions of pounds of unfunded tax cut, that crashed the economy and left millions paying more on their mortgages, wasn't it?
Mr. Speaker, everyone knows that 2 years ago I wasn't afraid to repeatedly warn out what her economic policies would lead to, even if it wasn't what people wanted to hear at the time. Mr. Speaker, I was right then, but I'm also right now when I say that his economic policies would be a disaster for Britain. He would send inflation up, mortgages up, and taxes up, and working people would pay the price.
Well, finally, you might be tempted to say,
Yeah.
after, how long's he been in power now? 15, 18 months. And that's the first time he's properly gone for Liz Truss in public and said, I lost to her, even though I made the argument that she was completely wrong.
I was right.
I was right. And here I am, prepared to say it, finally. And frankly, quite a lot of us wonder why he hasn't done
Hasn't done it before.
For quite some time now. But smart politics from Starmer, going after a working class woman, you're a billionaire. I mean, technically he isn't, and his wife is sort of pushing billionaire status, at least in dollars. But Labour would be the first people to say.
I think if you're arguing about whether or not
I
you're
know, but Labour would be the
dollars.
first people to say, "Oh, you shouldn't, equate a wife by her husband or a
Yeah,
husband
very
by
true.
her wife."
Yeah.
It's sort of. I think there's a hint as well, isn't there, in the first question as well. Do you know anybody with a mortgage? She said in the first question, who feels the same way. The hint being, you haven't got a mortgage, have you, mate? You don't understand this. And then the billionaire hit in the second question. So it's smart politics, and it's probably not a fight that Sunak is going to be able to win rhetorically, Liz Truss versus Angela Rayner. But interesting that instead of pivoting back to Rayner, he got stuck into Truss. It's at best a score draw so far for Sunak, but I think he deserves some credit for both answers, to be honest.
Well, they're smart. I mean, actually, in terms of because the complaint normally is that lots of listeners get in touch. He doesn't really answer the question. He just reads out the pre-planned lines, and they're normally burble, inflation, whatever. These are proper, sharp political comebacks. Yeah. Which is sort of leveled the scores a bit. I'll take your point. It's as far as he's gone in terms of attacking Liz Truss. He still hasn't sort of done it.
It's still
properly.
It's still not with the studs up, is it?
No. Well, maybe he's holding back for the next outing. Let's go back then. This is question number 3 from Keir Starmer.
Well, I appreciate the Prime Minister having the stomach to say it out loud, but everyone knows it's the Tory party's obsession with wild, unfunded tax cut that crashed the economy. We know it, he knows it, they know it, and the whole country is living it. So when is he finally going to learn the lesson from his predecessor's mistakes and explain where the money is coming from for his own completely unfunded £46 billion promise to scrap national insurance?
Mr. Speaker, when my predecessor was running for leader, to use his words, I did have the stomach to argue out loud about her economic policies, had the conviction to say that they were wrong. But not once, but twice, he tried to make his predecessor Prime Minister. Despite him opposing NATO and Trident, ignoring anti-Semitism and siding with our enemies. It's clear what he did. He put his own interests ahead of Britain's.
Blimey, why is this is proper...
Yeah, it's
proper...
not just Weetabix, it's with crack cocaine on top, isn't it? By Sunak standards, anyway.
I'm not sure that Liz Truss is necessarily going to survive till the end of question 6 at this rate, if he keeps on cracking it up. So that the argument that Labour are really trying to land, and if people have been on social media, you'll have seen these adverts a lot, that the ambition of Jeremy Hunt to abolish national insurance at some point in the future, were you to do that right now, would cost you £46 billion.
Yes.
Which is handily £1 billion more than the £45 billion of unfunded tax cuts that Liz Truss put forward.
Yes, and so decent argument building for Starmer. We sometimes criticise him for not sort of doing this.
And,
so he's managed to have a sort of populist pop at Truss.
Fraction of the usual length.
Yes, and it's building an argument for something now, and that's good work. But again, a punchy response from Sunak. The argument he wants to draw is that I'm prepared to make difficult decisions and say the unthinkable, and we'll I'm sure hear about Starmer, not telling people what he's really about and toading to the unions at some point during this session of answers. But whisper it cautiously. We're only halfway through, but this is the best session for the both of them for quite some time, I would say.
And actually, because some people say it's all Punch and Judy, knockabout nonsense, all that. What's the point of obsessing so much about PMQs? But they do, at their best, tell us about where the parties are heading. They try out arguments. This is what the general election is going to look like.
Yes.
You're rich, out of touch. You and your lot crash the economy.
Yep.
And Rishi Sunak needs to answer those questions. And actually turning on Liz Truss for the first time is part of that. And then the counter argument is you can't trust Keir Starmer. He's all over the place. He tried to make Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister twice.
And he'll say whatever it takes.
He'll say whatever it takes, and he'll probably put your mortgage up in the process. So actually teasing those out, more than anything today, that both of them much shorter.
Yes,
which just makes for a sharper political exchange.
It also gives the other guy less time to think about what he's doing, and it's it's a very good technique. Anyone who's prepped people for PMQs will tell you that they try and encourage some of that, and most of the people doing it.
Best possible thing, stand up, say no, sit down. Yeah. And then, because I don't know what's going on.
We've got Daniel Zeichner, who is a Labour MP, with a question about Liz Truss, which we can finish on.
In the exchanges earlier, we didn't hear much of a defence from the Prime Minister of his predecessor, so perhaps he could tell the House, what does he consider to be her greatest achievement?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, while the party opposite were busy trying to take us back into the EU and reverse the referendum result, my predecessor was signing trade deals around the world, which have now meant, Mr. Speaker, that Brexit Britain has overtaken the Netherlands, France and Japan to become the fourth largest exporter in the world.
Well, that's actually a surprisingly good answer.
I was about to say it was good to see someone reviving the honourable tradition of slightly eccentric Labour MP asking smart-ass questions towards the end of
My
PMQs.
favourite was always the guy who asked Tony Blair to sum up his political philosophy, which left him gape-mouthed like a fish.
Wasn't it his last PMQs? And didn't he just say, I think I'll leave that, or something? Basically, I can't be bothered.
Yeah.
Yeah. But actually quite a good answer.
Quite a good answer. Yeah.
Slightly flying in the face of the previous new strategy of criticising Liz Truss.
Which was very interesting, though.
Yeah.
Which follows what Daniel Finkelstein has written before he should have long done, which is to mark himself out as different from his predecessors.
Well, maybe he's been listening to How to Win an Election.
Perhaps. I'm sure he has.
Who isn't?
Well, who isn't? We know that Jeremy Hunt does, because he ended up taking the mick out of Keir Starmer for being fat, thanks to Peter Mandelson, which we don't need to revive now.